Hi everyone, so today I thought we'd have a look at this book here, the Tao of Jeet Kune by Bruce Lee. So, I don't do Jeet Kune, I've never studied it, but that being said, I don't think this is really, it's not a how-to book of Jeet Kune in many ways. It was written from what I know, after he had quite a debilitating back injury, and he just started to formalise and put down into paper or organise some of his notes, and that's how this book came about. It's certainly not a method book in any stretch of the word, and in many ways I think of this as being more similar to something like the Tao Te Ching. The Tao Te Ching being something that you would dip into and out of. You wouldn't read it cover to cover, but you'd take a small passage of it or one page and go and sit and think about it, meditate about it. And in this is certainly similar in the way I'd approach using it. So I think one thing to think about when reading through this is it's really obvious that Bruce Lee was very much a thinking martial artist. So sometimes people wrongly, I think, can separate those who would be described as thinking martial artists, or those involved in the art of martial art. They separate it from the practical, harder-edged self-defense side. It should be fairly obvious, particularly with our training, that that's not the case. You can certainly be a thinking martial artist and make sure that what you do is always informed by the harder-edged reality of self-defense. Maybe that's just because of who I've trained with and his reason for doing martial art. But I feel everything comes along with it. But it's just always backed up. Whatever you do, you can take the art side of it, but it's always backed up by it's also effective at the same time. Anyway, so looking through this, there's a huge amount of information, and it's basically, well, it seems to me to be one man and his training notes as he tries to make sense of and improve and categorize information and ideas. So you've always got to put this book in context, just the same as you would with the Tao Te Ching. And in fact, if you look at there's an early chapter that really summarizes that. Okay, yeah, so he talks about stuff like there's a chapter called Organized Despair, which is I suspect squarely aimed at traditional martial arts, and he's got a series of ideas about that. So he's reacting to the world of traditional martial arts, and you've got to remember that's the world he's coming from. He was immersed in it. He was living in Hong Kong. His dad did Tai Chi. He was learning with Master Yip Man, and so he's involved in this, deeply involved in this Chinese culture of martial arts, and he's reacting against it. And you've also got to put it into context of the time as well. So that the particular that era in history, a lot of people were reacting against societal norms and set ideas that people took for granted. People saying, well, actually, I don't agree with that. And in fact, one of the big influences on his thinking was a teacher, philosopher, whatever you want to call him, called Krishnamurti. And in fact, there are passages in this book where he's literally substituted word. He's taken direct quotes from Krishnamurti and just substituted martial art in it instead of the way or something. He was that influenced. I can't remember which ones there are, because it's been quite a few years since I've had a flick through this book. But what I do enjoy is is you can dip into it and take different things from it. And the way it's organised, if you look at the chapters, it's got stuff like qualities, and these are really one of the main chapter headings, which is then divided up, is qualities, and he talks about coordination, power, endurance, and then each one is a set of thoughts on what makes good balance, why is it important in combat, what is good form, how to cultivate it. You know, it's there's no series of exercises, and it's perfect for someone. It's perfect for any martial artist to look at what they're doing and check it against some of these ideas. So good form is whatever good form is within the martial art that you study. So ironically, with his distaste for traditional martial arts, he's made a book that's perfect to be applicable to traditional martial arts. Then he talks about tools. Now some of them are not so applicable. So I do Wing Chun. I don't really want to learn the good mechanics of a right cross. I mean, it's interesting. It's interesting learning about that, but it's not applicable to me because I'm using different body mechanics. So some of this stuff is not so applicable, and stuff like feints, you might adjust it for how you would use it within your martial art, but we don't really use feints in Wing Chun. If we make a movement and they don't block it or stop it or move, we hit them. If they do, we do something else. So all our feints are, unless countered or answered by the opponent, all our feints count. They all go through to strike. But anyway, but there's loads of other things. You can see some of his influence from fencing, where you've got one title on riposte. His chapter on attack, a lot of it is his tactics. And the interesting thing is, you can see now, you can go on YouTube and people have uploaded the sparring section from his Long Beach demonstration, where he's sparring, I think it's Taki Kimura and Ted Wong. And so you can see some of this sort of in action. I think it's that one as well, where he does blindfold Chisao and he accidentally falls over. I think it's Taki Kimura, which shows he's just human, which is nice. And then it sort of goes down to the end with the final chapters are circle with no circumference, and it's just a name, and that's where it goes really heavily into the philosophical section, and it's very influenced by Zen and Krishnamurti. And I think it's a good thing to include in a book. I mean, there's lots of, the impression I get is there's lots of arguments among certain people doing Jeet Kune about different ways to interpret it. You know, do you copy his techniques, or is it all just a theory? Some people seem to think it's just collecting as many different styles as possible and sort of smushing them together to make the ultimate martial art, which I don't think he was about at all, to be honest. But I don't know, no one does, because I didn't know him. If you really want to know, you have to go and talk to someone who trained with him. And from what I can see, most of the people, arguing about it didn't. But ultimately, it was an unfinished martial art in many ways. It was just one man's attempt to grapple with what he was confronted with, and the difficulties of being a martial artist. Because you've got to remember, he left Hong Kong at a very early age, not completing Wing Chun. His fighting experience was some moderately bloody scraps on a rooftop in Hong Kong with other teenagers. And then he sort of moves to America, and then he's got to kind of fill in the blanks. So he's collecting all this information to try and fill in the blanks, or just try and find what he wants to be a complete or effective fighting system. So a lot of this is him looking at it, and there's little bits about ground fighting, because he thinks, well, what if you fall over? What should I do? He's trying to categorise in some way some of the some blocking movements. So you've got his attempt at the categorization here of of different parries. And then alongside that, you've got collections of technique. So he's thinking about these techniques here. So he's got all these techniques. But the question is, did he use these techniques? Well, I mean, we don't know. I mean, you can look and try and find some resources. Maybe one of his students will say, yeah, I learnt that neck crank. He taught it. He did it on me. That he liked that particular technique. But outside of that, you can't really say. What he might have been doing is just collecting all this information and then just seeing what's going to work for him. And he'd be collecting it off people. He'd talk to wrestlers about this sort of information. He'd have like little information exchanges. And then you've got that next to, little, notes on a hook, So you've got this weird juxtaposition of having some attempt at categorization and preserving and organizing techniques which he was obviously already familiar with and thought, this is the way I want to work. So you've got this categorization, and then you've got this collection of techniques which he's obviously, they're just notes that he might not necessarily include in what he wants to do. And then you've got alongside that just thoughts and notes. You've got these, they're really short. I mean, look at this. You've just got on the hook, it just says avoid telegraphing, start and end in the ready position, hand is never pulled back or lowered. It's just really this little short thing. He's obviously thought, he's either seen a student do it or he's done it and realised, don't telegraph. So it's a note, and then he's also had the same thoughts on certain other things like punch angles or positioning or footwork or how to remain with good form or speed or all these other little things. I mean, look, you've got this page here, some weapons from JKD, and it's this is a page of categorization. I mean, it's interesting. How useful it is, I don't know. So this is why it's not a how-to book. They've sort of tried to organise it, but they've not done a very good job, and it's impossible because it's just stuff, just kind of thrown down. There's no editorial going on here. He's not. I don't know. Maybe he was working with someone to edit it, but I wouldn't have thought so. But it really is a really interesting book, just to have a flick through or to find different things to work on within your martial art. I mean, I remember there's a really interesting passage on relaxation that I worked with, which was you have to first acquire the feeling of relaxation, then be able to initiate that feeling of relaxation on demand, and then be able to reproduce it under pressure. And that's great. That's a really, really useful bit of information that you can go away and work with. And there's a lot of that in this book. And if you really want to get an idea about, I think about Jeet Kune and his ideas, flicking through this is really interesting. Like I said, not to necessarily learn JKD, because as wonderful as it is, I'm not particularly interested in learning it as a style. And then obviously you have 50 people arguing whether it's a style or not, so ignore that. But it's notes of a very skilled and talented martial artist that could help you and improve what you do, whatever martial arts style you do. But I would say that it's useful if you do Wing Chun, because we have that edge of reality, and that's what he's thinking. He's always thinking reality, even though he has the spiritual and the art side of it. Everything he does has to be functional. You know, that's his bottom line. It has to be functional. I get the feeling he was sort of pushing himself to see how far the human body could go. But still, it's always what he wants is, you know, a martial art that is at the end functional. But I also think the philosophical side for him is also functional, because he wants his spiritual side at the same time to be functional, or functioning at as a higher level as possible. So yeah, Tao of Jeet Kune. Interesting book, well worth picking up. Yeah, very good.